Joining us now at the big board, NBC News national political correspondent, the one and only Steve Kornacki. So where are we today, Steve?
All right, Katie, we'll look at it from two vantage points here. First, nationally, this is the average of all the national polls coming out of that Labor Day weekend. Harris 48, Trump 45, 3-point advantage for the Democrats. They're happy to be ahead. They're happy to be in a different position than they were when Joe Biden was their candidate. Of course, he was basically trailing Donald Trump all year. But for Republicans, there's solace in these numbers, too, because Donald Trump is no stranger to this kind of a setup. Labor Day being a little bit behind, that was the case in 2016. He trailed Hillary Clinton by 5 points at this point, won the election. 2020, he trailed Joe Biden by high single digits at this point, didn't win the election, but came awfully close in the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is the next level we'll take a look at this thing from. This is where it's won or lost, obviously. 7 core battleground states. You see them in gray here. We're going to be returning to them over and over the next 63 days. But there's all sorts of paths for each candidate here, at least potentially. Let's just show you the simplest and most direct for each. And we'll start with Kamala Harris. The polling in these states, obviously, it is close. It is exceedingly close in some of them. But it's been a tick better for Harris and the Democrats in these 3, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. All 3 of them went for Biden in 2020. And Harris's simplest path is probably just winning these 3 states. Let's turn them blue for the sake of showing you what that would mean in terms of the Electoral College. There you see it. And what does that give her? 270, exactly the magic number of electoral votes. Probably her simplest path. Now, from the Republican standpoint, what would Trump's simplest path be? Well, they'd obviously have to win one of these 3. The one that they're most invested in is Pennsylvania. They think maybe the fact that Harris didn't take Josh Shapiro, the governor there, maybe that was a missed opportunity for Democrats. The Republicans certainly right now spending extremely heavily here. If Trump were to succeed in flipping Pennsylvania, take a look at what that would do. First of all, you see Harris would then have to compensate. Even if she had Wisconsin, Michigan, she'd then need to take at least 2 of these Sun Belt states. That's because Pennsylvania is the largest of the swing states, 19 electoral votes. But then Trump's path would be reasonably simple from here. What would he have to do if he gets Pennsylvania? Well, North Carolina, it's the one battleground state Trump already won in 2020. He would need to hold that. And then Georgia. The margin was just under 12,000 votes. Trump did win it in 2016. If Trump can win it back in 24, along with holding Carolina and flipping Pennsylvania, he'd be the one sitting at exactly 270 electoral votes. So, again, all sorts of different paths here. I think you see the simplest for each candidate. And I think if there's one big takeaway from this, first among equals when we talk about swing states is Pennsylvania, simply because with 19 electoral votes, it's larger than any of these others. And if you can get that, if either candidate can get Pennsylvania, the path from there for them each becomes very simple. So Pennsylvania, of all the swing states, looms probably as the most crucial right now.
Keep hearing that. Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. If I had a whiteboard, maybe I'd write that down 3 times. Steve Kornacki, thank you. Joining us now, Democratic strategist and pollster and MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher. If you know, you know. Cornell, changed and close. 2 words that Mark Murray, our elections guy here, is using our polling guy, is using to describe what he's seeing in the numbers. You took issue with that this weekend on the site formerly known as Twitter. Explain.
Well, look, if you won, this is what I hate the national average polling, national average, because the national average polling stuff is how we got the red wave that wasn't a real red wave, right? And it's a lot of bad polling out there, and you mix them all up. But if you let's look at the ABC poll that just recently came out. Or actually, let's look at the ABC polling over the last couple of polls here. Donald Trump is consistently at roughly 46%. Where is Donald Trump on election day? Oh, he's consistently at roughly 47, 46%, right? So Donald Trump has shown over time, not in polling, but actually on election day, where he has a ceiling, and he desperately needs to grow that. Desperately needs to grow that ceiling, but it seems as though he has a pretty capped off ceiling, and what we see, and I love the reference to 2016. Here's the difference between 2016. You had real viable third-party candidates on the ballot in these states in 2016, and real third-party voting in 2016, and in a forced two-way race, yes, Hillary was always up, well in the forced two-way race. But Katie, it was never a forced two-way race in 2016. So those third-party voters, you saw breaking off and getting in the way of her ability to get to a majority. What you've seen in all the polling right now is third-party candidates really sort of shrinking. And when Harris got in the race, a lot of especially those younger voters who were holding back for Biden, who were just not energized around Biden, they began to move away from the third party and begin to sort of consolidate around her. So she still has room to grow, and she still has to introduce herself and grow out that support and keep the rest of the vote out there. Because again, not polling, but actually what we've seen on several election days, Donald Trump is a 47% proposition. And the case is, can she consolidate the majority of the rest of the electorate around her, or does she lose off to third-party voting? Again, let's look at Pennsylvania, which Steve just pointed out and was talking about, right? Again, go to 2016. Hillary was off of Barack Obama's mark in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin almost by the precise number of voters who were breaking third party. And that's how Donald Trump wins. He wins by subtraction, not by addition. Because again, Katie, I think we know where he's going to be on election day because we've seen it on several election days. He's going to be at roughly 47, maybe 48%.
Does Kamala Harris at some point need to break with Joe Biden on one issue or multiple issues, just do a little bit more breaking with him to propose herself more as the change candidate? The change candidate's going to win this election, whether the change candidate is somebody changing from not this last administration, but the one before that, Donald Trump, or Donald Trump changing from this last administration. So would it behoove Kamala Harris to make a break and be the true change candidate in this current state?
Well, you make a fine point. We're going to go into another election cycle where voters in America are yet again looking for change. Look, I think the very idea of Harris is change, right? She's a woman at the top of the ticket. She's a woman of color at the top of the ticket. Voters were arguing and sort of clamoring for someone younger and more youthful. She's clearly that. She's got to walk a tight line, Kate, because she can't get too far away from Biden, because to a certain extent she's tied to Biden, and so she's got to talk about their accomplishments. And as we've talked about before, there are plenty of accomplishments that this president has moved over the finish line that are really popular, more popular than he was. So she's got to tie herself to those accomplishments, but also pivot to the future. And I think that the pivot to the future and the conversation about a better America, a more unified America, a more free America is a perfect contrast with Donald Trump, who is trying in many ways to take the country back and move our freedoms back. I think that's the change. But it's a tightrope to walk, Kate, because she can't pull herself too far from the guy who brought her in the first place.